Yeah, hi. Um, Today is a December session of the Colloquium, the Coacharya Coaching Colloquium. We've been doing it, as you know, from the month of May this year as part of the International Coaching Week, in a sense, our way of contributing to that. And just to let you know, before I go into today's program and what's happened with us at this point in time, is that next year, during the International Coaching Week, we are planning to have for 8 days, 2 speakers a day. And the cast includes people, of course, starting with people like Marshall Goldsmith, Janet Harvey, Hilary Oliver, who's past president of ICF, Liz Lewis, who's a past president of EMCC, and several others in this field who have contributed tremendously. Peter Hawkins, the guru of team coaching. And we have Damon Goldberg on supervision, David Clutterberg, who's speaking on mentoring, Barry Johnson on polarities, and several other people like this. It's going to be probably a stellar cast of people who are legends in their own fields in coaching. And we will start putting them out. They are free, as always, starting, I think, from the 7th of May till about the 14th of May, 8 days and 2 sessions a week. And all of them will get you CCUs. And those of you who are working towards renewals, just by attending those 7 or 8 days, you will get about 16 CCUs. And rest of the year, you would get your total of 24 that you require as core competencies for your renewal of credentials. Having said that, going into today's session, as I mentioned to you, unfortunately, Ankush, who is our speaker for today, for tonight, he's unable to join. He has a personal emergency. His father-in-law is in hospital. He's just messaged me saying that he couldn't join. So based on what I asked you, and many of you has said about global trends, Murugan, you asked about college students. Let me put it this way. I think it's a little too early in the game for anyone who is still in college or graduating out of college to start looking at coaching as a career. I personally would not really recommend it. Yes, they can be motivated towards it. There are a few, in a sense, our own daughter, when she was in school, she became a counselor. There are a few people who have that kind of a passion and interest. There may be a few like that, but that's not quite common. So I would leave that as a separate topic at some other point in time. If we have a millennial crowd, young crowd, we could possibly talk to them as to what their interests would be and take it from there. So I'll go into the global trends and also Sandhya, but what is it that is in India? Views on coaching procurement. Yeah, okay. So let me, you can always come back and you can sort of break silence and come on this. The last few years, based on my own experiences, and I started, as probably I have told you, I got into the coaching field pretty much by accident around 2011. And I started training people to be coaches in 2012 and started coaching myself. At that point in time, my experience was primarily in India. And I was the 5th PCC coach in India. There were about 20 ACCs, totally about 25. And almost everybody, I would say 90% of the people who call themselves coaches were actually saying that they were coaches based on the experience in the corporate space. And they were primarily mentors. And most people didn't really understand the difference between what mentoring and coaching is. I mean, today, there are people who do that, probably not the same percentage. Companies have become much more strict about mentioning specificities, parameters in their RFPs and so on and so forth. Just the other day, there was a gentleman who called me and I was introduced to him. I knew him, not that well, by someone else saying that he's interested in coaching. So as I was about to start explaining what we do and what are the kind of coaching credentials we sort of train people for, he stopped me at my first sentence and said, yeah, Ram, I don't have the time for all this. I've been coaching for several years now. I don't have any training. I don't have any credentials, but I want to get a credential. I want you to tell me how I can get a credential. My first impulse was to tell him that, yeah, you can start your own credentialing agency and give yourself a credential. That's probably about the only way that you could, because there is not a single credentialing agency that I know of today, be it ICF, be it PMCC, be it CCE, any of the reputed ones, ACUK. There may be some marginally popular ones who might take risks with it, but they will not award any credentials unless they train people through accredited, approved trainers or very reputed institutions like the Harvard and the Stanford and George Washington University and so on and so forth, who conduct these programs, which are in line with their competencies, and they train them to that. And then people are successful in it, they are certified, and then they can apply with a certain amount of coaching experience. Most people, in my own experience, who call themselves as coaches without the training, they could be very good mentors. I have no doubts about it. One of the things that I learned when I started my coaching career was that I had about 40 years of coaching corporate experience behind me. I was a mentor. I was a corporate leader. I had done many training programs. I had been a CEO for 20 years. I had built billion-dollar companies. I had managed people across the world. I oversaw at one point in time a dozen supervised conglomerates, joint ventures. But when I started coaching, I found that I knew nothing about coaching. All that I was doing was I was an excellent solution giver. And that is no longer acceptable in what we call as coaching. I would really, those of you, I have mentioned this several times, if you really wish to understand more about what the process of coaching is, there are two people I would dearly love you all to read. One is Ed Shine, who's written this book called Humble Inquiry, Asking to Telling, or Telling to Asking, Telling to Asking. And Ed Shine, ED is the first name, Edward, it's Chein. He, along with people like Peter Senge, Otto Scharmer, in MIT, he's one of the greatest thought leaders. He doesn't promote himself as a thought leader. He's absolutely brilliant. And his books in many other areas of organizational interventions and so on are superb. And the other, of course, is the one who wrote the seminal book on coaching, Carl Rogers, on being a person, which talks about client congruence and so on and so forth. So coaching is as far away from solution giving and telling as people engagement is from task orientation. And more in the current generation, especially with millennials, organizations are discovering it's no longer possible for superiors, for bosses, to tell people what to do. People need to be influenced and inspired. These young people want to be told why they are being told to do what they are asked to do. And there's no other way. And so the global trend is pretty much towards that today. And therefore, at the first level, there's a far greater emphasis on some kind of a professional framework through which coaches are trained. And I, in case I have told you the story before, I'd like to pardon me, but 5-6 years ago, when I started my coaching and I was part of this very large, probably the largest coaching agglomerator in the world, and I found that I was one of the very few out of the several hundred coaches who was a PCC coach or certified or credentialed by an agency. The rest of them, they were actually experienced coaches. That's what they call themselves. When I asked the person who runs this agency, he was actually someone who was mentored by Marshall Goldsmith. He told me, every year I send out surveys, and coaching competencies, credentialing comes out pretty low on the totem pole. It's not very important, and therefore we don't really think that's what companies want. And this was, I think, in the year 2013-14. Come 2016, this organization has started training every one of its coaches, over 1,000 coaches, telling them that unless you become PCC credentialed, it's going to be difficult for us to get you jobs. And over and above that, they have actually moved into supervision as well. So there's a huge shift in terms of what coaching used to be, from just being experienced, I have some expertise in a particular field and I can be a coach, to something where the companies are looking for a framework of your ability to create awareness in people. So that's the single most important shift that I see. And that is in India today, through our own system, through the Coacharya, out of about the 500 odd people that we have trained in the last 5 years, and more than 400 have been credentialed, we probably have over 2/3 of the population of credentialed coaches in India. I can list at least about 25 to 30 who are today heading L&D operations in various companies, very large companies. This makes a difference. So when they have been trained in coaching and they see what coaching has done to them, what value they have added to themselves, and they would like to have the same kind of experience with the people who are being coached by, in their companies, and therefore they are looking for coaches with somewhat similar training. And so more and more, this is increasing. And there are several other companies I know today. Some of the largest companies in India have got people who are the CHROs and head of L&Ds are all in one way or another exposed either to coaching or who've been trained as coaches themselves. So it's a very, very significant shift that has happened. Parallelly, there are a couple of other shifts that I see happening. More and more, I find there is an interest in supervision of coaches. And this is today pretty much the norm in Europe, thanks to EMCC, which has been promoting supervision a lot. And in EMCC, one of the preconditions for anyone to be qualified would be whether they are supervised or not. Without the supervision, they would not give them a credential, unlike in the case of ICF. What it does, initially, I really didn't have much of an understanding of what supervision is about. And so I decided to pay a significant amount, and I'm going through supervision. And from next year, I'm planning to incorporate that in our own program so that people can get the parallel wisdom of supervision as well. The supervision is primarily a process in which, rather than mentoring of skills, you talk about your experiences in coaching. And there's a tremendous amount of reflection that happens between you and the supervisor. And this reflective practice by yourself and with the supervisor is enormous value to your gaining mastery in coaching. I would say today, so in our next batch of mastery, which is starting early next year, we are incorporating supervision as an essential element. And we believe, Cindy and I, that it's extremely important for every coach to be supervised. And parallelly, we are also today encouraging several of our PCC coaches to start applying for EMCC, because we are accredited by EMCC. And our training is good enough for them to go through the EMCC certification process, credentialing process. And so I work with them in terms of supervising to give them an idea about what supervising is, and also for them to get the supervisory hours. So in addition to coaching, now supervision is becoming a rather important area in the coaching space. The third huge shift that I see is related to the economics of coaching. There are two things which come out of it. How do you make coaching more affordable? That's one. And the second is, how do you make sure that the coaching that we pay for is actually adding value, the evidencing, the verification, etc. The first part, one of the changes that I do see in corporations today, while companies are willing to pay for external coaches at the leadership level, the CXO levels, one level below the CXOs, pretty huge sums, actually. They are being more careful about extending it to lower levels. And they find that team coaching is adding as much value as individual coaching is. And those of you who have not muted yourself, can you please mute yourself? Thank you. Oh, thank you. Somebody is being very helpful by honking a horn. So if you could just mute yourself, please, those of you who have not muted yourself. We had in November with us, last month, we had Preeti DeMello from Tata Consulting Services, and she spoke about the Force Multiplier program that's running in her company, Systemic Coaching, which is based on blended team and individual coaching. It's enormously powerful. And you are able to reach out to multiple number of people rather than one person. And it also makes sure that each one is supported by the others in the team. You can work with team building exercises and stuff like that. So it can be a very integrated approach of coaching and training and facilitation in team building. This is something that is becoming more and more common. And we are now working on some variations of this, working with companies, helping their mentor managers, as it were, to become coach leaders, taking them through these kind of programs, which are specifically oriented towards training them to credentials. And at the end of it, we would authorize them to act as trainers on our behalf and train people within the company, just paying us a royalty. So it becomes much more affordable for companies to continue to build a sustained culture within their company. So the three major trends that I have so far talked about, one is the credentialing part of it, which must be music to most of your ears who are themselves on the credentialing path as a huge differentiating unique value proposition. The second is in terms of supervision, which I would strongly encourage many of you to attend. In fact, we have sent out mailers to many of you. Every month today, similar to this colloquium, which happens on the third Wednesday, I conduct a supervision webinar on the second Wednesdays of the month. This is the third Wednesday of the month. And we cover both team coaching and supervision. Basically, just to familiarize all of you with these concepts. And the other one that I mentioned is people are looking for more and more for evidencing. And the evidencing is not merely just following the CC2 kind of competencies in coaching, asking them what is the outcome now and so on, but much more detailed in terms of, in a systemic perspective, what does the organization want? Is it in line with what the client wants? And if they are different, how do you resolve that? And if they are the same, how do you evidence that? And what Marshall Goldsmith calls the stakeholder-centered coaching. More frequent interactions with the stakeholders. Is there a difference that is happening? Using assessment techniques. And of course, there are people who talk about ROI in coaching in a very financial modeling perspective. Yeah, much as I would like to use them, my own experience of working at them is they are still extremely speculative because many of the assumptions which go into those kind of models are very iffy. And I would still go with specific pain points that the organization has put down and what would be considered as measures of success and moving towards it. So these are 3 or 4 trends that I see happening around. It's not only globally, as always, being led by North America in this particular case, because coaching has been far more advanced. In some ways in Europe, where the EMCC contribution have been enormous, especially in areas such as supervision and team coaching. Some of the greatest exponents of supervision and team coaching, like Peter Hawkins and David Clutterbuck and people like that, they're all from Europe. And their knowledge is being now shifted to other parts of the world. They are both going to speak in the ICW 2018. So at this point in time, I'll stop to breathe. And if there are any questions, you could break the silence, come on. And of course, there are several of you who put down chats. So I would like to do both in case you have any specific questions. Please unmute yourself and ask me. Thank you.
Good evening, Murugan side.
Yeah.
See, last week I happened to attend one of the Dean of IIT professor on system thinking for leadership.
Yeah.
As I was now undergoing a lot of reading about coaching, is there is any article or any thought process system thinking on coaching? Because what he says in the system thinking is some of the parts is more successful than individual. Similarly, if I take every individual, it's nothing but some parts of the period. So, is there any your viewpoint on system thinking on coaching?
Okay. First of all, the source for much of what is today being touted as systems learning, system thinking, system coaching, all that is from Peter Senge, the work that he did in MIT, his books like Fifth Discipline and so on. They are the source books. Anybody else who is writing on them are actually taking from him his knowledge. Thank you. Hello, can you please mute yourself? I don't know. I mean, can you all check your... Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah. This is what happens when one person not muting sort of disturb everybody else. Okay, coming back to your question, Murugan, in terms of, at the simplest level, systems thinking is about, as you said, it's a sum of the parts. It's not just about the individuals. It's about other people who are working together with that individual, and also the larger organizational system in which they are working. Now, before going deeper into Fifth Discipline, which itself is a huge, it's a huge field. One of the things that I started experiencing when I started coaching was that however good I was in terms of transforming a particular client during my coaching, when they went back to work, a couple of things happened. One, unless they were extraordinarily confident and good, they tended to regress back into some of those kind of experiences, that behavior patterns that they had before. The other was that if they were really very good and they found that they could not continue in the environment in the way that they have been transformed today, they quit. Either which way, it didn't benefit the organization and it didn't benefit the individual. The whole purpose for which the organization was spending money on these people to be coached was it was completely wasteful. This happened to me when I was coaching a bunch of 10 people in a very, very large multinational, one I had very deep experience with. And as it so happened, while I was coaching them, they were also given a project which was pretty much in an area that I was a specialist in my days before coaching. And I had a discussion with the sponsor, and we clearly agreed that I was not going to be a mentor. However, I would generally follow up with them as to what progress they were making in this project, parallel to the kind of coaching that I was doing. And we found that in about 3 or 4 sessions out of the 12 sessions that I had, and when I had a meeting with him, there was very little visible progress. And everything that I heard from these 10 people were excuses to why things were not happening. So the sponsor was pretty despondent, and he said, what can we do about this? And I don't want you to become a mentor. I know that you know the subject very well, and probably you could work with them as a mentor, but that's not what I really want to do. What would you like to do? So I said, I also don't want to do that. So what the thought that occurred to me was, and I wasn't quite sure why, honestly, and at that time, I really hadn't read Peter Senge to that extent. I told them that, look, if you give me an opportunity to sort of interact with these people, the whole coaching with those 10 people over 12 sessions was all on Zoom on the internet. I said, if you would like to call them over to your headquarters, which was in Mumbai, and pay for me to come over there and spend a couple of days with them, and I could have a team session with these people for 2 hours or 3 hours a day for 2 days, and let's see what happens. I really don't know. I can't promise you anything, but I would like to try that. When I did that, what really came up was, as they discussed as a team, was very, very different what they were feeding to me individually. The team dynamics was very different. I could make out some getting along with each other, some were not getting along with each other. So it gave me a much, much better feel for how they were interacting as a team, who was getting along, who was not. I'll go back to in a minute, was a psychological safety in that team. There wasn't. But in the 2 days, despite the fact I had just 2 days, about 6 hours, there was some amount of awareness that was being created within them that they need to do certain things better. And they agreed that this is what we would do. And surprise, surprise, in the next 3 sessions, what they hadn't done for perhaps a couple of years, and the organization was struggling with it. And suddenly they were making kind of breakthroughs, and the sponsor turned around and told me, look, it is miraculous what happened. So I worked on this and developed a process which was based on appreciative inquiry called the SPEED process. And I started using it with a couple of organizations, and I have done it with about a dozen organizations now, and I'm working with a few organizations today, ongoing. And it works on the basis of working with people in team, taking them through a co-creative process, building a team first emotionally, that's the first step, building a co-created vision, and moving from there into a kind of an action plan. The whole thing can be done between a day and 2, depending on the numbers. And then I would work with them as a coach, both as a group every month over 9 to 12 months, and also where needed individually. It's been path-breaking. I don't want to really take any credit for it. There are other people, I'm sure, who are doing it. In fact, in TCS, some of the work that they're doing is somewhat similar to this. And a couple of things that came up, and I started doing this work. I started doing research. And those of you who have done, let's say for a moment, systemic coaching is equal to team coaching. There might be slight small differences. I'll come to that later. The 2 biggest pieces of work that have been done on this, one is by a guy called Peter Lencioni, who's written this book called The Dysfunctions of a Team, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. Very famous. If you want to read more about it, go Google and you will find out the 5 dysfunctions. And for the last 3 years, there has been this major project called Project Aristotle by Google. And they spent literally hundreds of $millions in studying teams all across Google, and I'm told some outside as well. And they came up, in a way, surprise, surprise, as it were. But the point is, they came up, Peter Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions are about the negatives of what is happening, why teams are not functioning well. And the Google's idea was to try and find out what makes teams work better. They were pretty much mirror images. The most important that they found in team coaching, group coaching, whatever you want to call it, I really don't understand the difference that people make out of group and team. A group becomes a team and it's emotionally bonded. That's the only way that I would understand that. And the team has a very, very clear vision, whereas a group may sometimes have, may not have. Psychological safety is the most important factor. People have to be able to open up, communicate with one another without having the fear of being rebuked, put down, opposed, insulted, etc., etc. And you would find in many, many teams, this doesn't happen. There is somebody there who would be skeptical, who would make themselves offensive, all kinds of stuff. And that doesn't work. That's why teams do not form, period. So Google started instituting this procedure, and to this as a how to, so the what part of it is a psychological safety. I would say how to is a very deep anchoring in appreciative inquiry principles. That one of the things, ground rules that I have when I work with teams is you are not allowed to say anything negative about what the other person has said. And if you do, you're out of the room. It's almost as simple as that. And I have had a few cases where I have basically told them, if you're not willing to abide by it, just stay out of it, because you are not being a part of the team. Being a part of the team is not about insulting somebody. And if you want to add value to it, there are very, very good ways of feedback that you can give in a developmental way. So I explained to them what the feedback is. The second, arising in a sense out of the psychological safety, the Google study put down, is a factor called dependability. Can I depend on another person to get the work done, to support me, to help me, to nurture me, etc.? In a larger way, I would call this as people engagement. A person, a boss or a colleague coming across and asking you, hey, what is it that I can do to help you? Is there something that I can do to make your life easier, better, more productive? And you in turn ask that person. So that is the second aspect of team, which is dependability. The three others are related to, in a sense, about the vision that the company has, the objectives and so on, whether they are clear. The fourth one is whether they are structured. And the fifth one, which becomes extremely important for many companies today, is the impact. Is there a larger meta objective than my own personal self-interest? Are we moving from the me to the we? In some area, they call it the thematic objectives which are happening. So if you put all together, and if my own experience is those, I don't remember every stage of the fifth discipline now. It's about the individual's contribution. It's about how they work with a team. And then how does it apply to the organizational objective? Let's just look at these three rather than the three overlapping areas of the worker or the manager, whoever, and the team within which that person, he or she works, and the larger organization. If you just allow the individual to work directly with the organization, usually it's not very functional, it's dysfunctional because there's a huge gap. However, when you try and relate the individual to the organization through the team, which means the organization sets down certain team objectives. This is what you as a team need to do. And the team in turn then works with the individuals to decide what the individuals can do to be able to fulfill the team objective. There's a far greater alignment. There's an extraordinarily good alignment, and that alignment leads to performance. And there's a purpose. So this whole thing can come together. And to me, I mean, there are different people who talk about systemic in very different ways. I'm not an expert on Peter Senge. I've read, I've tried to understand whatever he has said, and I try to apply it. And this is something I find works in practice. So I would just leave it to you as a thought at this point in time, as something that any of you can practice. And believe you me, and this is going to be the future of coaching. The future of coaching is not going to be one-on-one. One-on-one is going to be more exceptional than team coaching, because team coaching is more affordable. I don't know about you all, but I charge by time, by the number of hours. It doesn't matter to me whether there are 10 people in the room, 20 people in the room, or one person in the room. And therefore, the company pays me exactly the same amount when I am working with 10 or 20 people as I work one person. And if I'm able to make myself more effective in working with 10 or 20 people, the cost that the company pays is 5% of what they would be doing for one person's coaching. And it makes eminent sense. And most companies, people who run these companies, L&D people and CHR, they're not stupid. They fully understand what the implications are. Their doubt is, are you capable of doing it? What you say, will it result? Initially, it's a bit of a gamble for them. And therefore, one of the things that I tell them, which is more and more coming into vogue, by the way, and it was Marshall Goldsmith who started this trend. Do you have the courage to say that if it doesn't work, you don't have to pay me, or you have to pay me a very small percentage? And that's one of the things that I say right in the beginning. I want you to clearly establish your organizational pain points and objectives and your success measures, almost as a CC2. And having done that, if I do not achieve it, and these milestones are not achieved, then my fees would correspondingly reduce or increase. It's like a bonus and penalty clause that you would have in any company. I don't see any reason why we as coaches cannot do it. People will turn around and tell me, oh, ICF says the coach is not responsible for the outcome. That's in a very, very narrow sense. You believe in the potential of the client, and the client is able to do it. But at the same time, we have no business to be where we are if we are not able to produce the results that we promise. Otherwise, we don't need to be coaches. So these are clearly changes that are going to drive us. And one other area, believe you me, that's happening, which I was very surprised this time. I was discussing with another fairly large, reputed coaching agglomerator. And she herself is a PCC coach. And she was keen, I mean, not keen, but she said she might at some time be interested in working with us to become an MCC. And one of the things that she told me, Ram, your background, that you're a CEO, you've done all this, is tremendously valuable, because more and more companies are looking around to see if the coach is someone who has walked the path. And this is happening. So it's a reverse that is happening today. It's not enough to be a mentor. It is not enough to be a coach. Can you be a coach and a mentor? And which is one of the reasons why I'm much more comfortable with Abcde, EMCC, European Mentoring and Coaching Council, who look at the totality, the integrated aspect of coaching and mentoring. And people, simple thing, very often people ask me, when you want to recommend us for coaching, why do you ask me what domain am I from? How does it make a difference? It doesn't make a difference to me, but to the organization it does. A banking industry would like to have someone who knows the banking language. A technology industry would like to have someone who speaks the technology language. And for their comfort, for the client's comfort, they would like to have people who have worked in those spaces, and preferably at leadership level. For instance, when Preeti recruited people, and they recruited several from Coacharya for their TCS program, and she very clearly laid down, I want to have these many hours of experience as years of experience as leadership experience, and these many hours of experience as leader coaching experience. Ultimately, people who are as experienced as she is, they find that there is a value in that experience as well, both as a coach as well as a leader. And therefore, those of you who are in fields where you are in corporate spaces, you are leaders, you should leverage that. And especially those who are not merely from the HR space, who are from other operational areas. I see, for example, Pramod here, I can see his picture. People like Pramod and others who have worked in very, very reputed companies and who have worked in functional areas, they have a tremendous value. And many of you will. It's not just an HR person. I'm an HR person, and therefore, yes, it has some value. But someone who has worked in the finance area or a marketing area or a sales area, operational area, could be as good and perhaps better coach than who are coming from the HR. We work with coaches to provide them the ability to work with people. So they don't necessarily have to have that experience before. That's our job to do that. So I can take anybody from any field and work with them to create or add on those skills. But the skills of the domain experience skills are more difficult, and more there is a very, very serious interest in those kind of backgrounds. So that's another area where there's a clear trend that is happening across the world. Yeah. So any question, Murugan? I don't know. I went for a long time, on this, but
no,
I have answered your question. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ram. Actually, you spoke very well about the system thinking with organization aspect to individual, team, and organization purpose. In Coacharya training, we had the wheel of life.
Yeah.
Is it the wheel of life is a system thinking for individual?
No. The objective is very different. You can interpret it whichever way you want. It's more a self-discovery process. Yes, you can use it as I would say it's a holistic way of looking at things, not systems way of looking at things. There's a difference. I mean, we can talk about it offline. But
thank you very much, Ram. Thank you very much.
Yeah, somebody else asked me about positive psychology. I think I don't remember. I can't make out the name here. Yeah, that positive psychology is an area which I got interested a few years ago. I was introduced to it actually by my son, and I read Martin Seligman, his book, Learned Optimism. Please read that book. It's a brilliant book, absolutely brilliant book. In a way, the positive psychology framework is pretty similar to cognitive behavioral therapy before that, Jungian psychodynamics, also rational emotive behavior therapy. It uses a model called the Abcde model. I'll come to it in a minute. Martin Seligman's finding was this. Martin Seligman said that when people do not feel that they are part of a system in order to influence any changes, they get depressed, demotivated, ultimately become helpless. And he, of course, did experiments with rats and others to prove this point. So essentially, you are an employee in an organization and you feel that you have no role to play in terms of influencing anything in that organization. And over a period of time, you feel a victim, you become a martyr, and sometimes you become a saboteur. So you are working against the interests of the company. So you become disengaged. And that is what is happening in many companies today. When they measure the percentage of people engagement, they find at least about 30 to 40% of people are actively disengaged. Positive psychology provides you the alternatives to be able to engage people at one level. One of the simplest things that Martin Seligman suggested many companies are doing today, whether you would find many companies are sending out surveys. It doesn't mean that they are going to implement every single suggestion that you make. But the fact is that every person who puts in a suggestion feels in some way empowered. The person feels, hey, I have now an opportunity to be able to say something which somebody is at least going to look at. Whether it's going to happen or not, I do not know. That itself motivates them. And that is really the most important part of those of you who are all L&D managers and in HR space. When some of you question what is the meaning of these employee surveys and happening, if you genuinely do the employee surveys, ask for people to bring their opinions in, even if it's a suggestion box or whatever the system is. It's like the Hawthorne effect that GE with Frederick Taylor started many, many decades ago. It's something very similar. People feel that they are able to do something, that they are able to make a change. So that's one aspect of it. The second aspect of it is the ABCDE model that Martin Seligman talks about and takes you through exercises. His book is very, very good. You can start your own understanding and applying it to your own use. A is about an activating trigger, that something happens and suddenly it triggers off a chain of thoughts in you based on some conditioned beliefs that you have. And then there are certain consequences, emotional consequences. You feel frustrated, irritated, etc. Now, take a simple example that I walk into a supermarket, let's say in the United States when I'm there, and as I walk to the checkout counter and I bought something and I find that the girl there, she's not smiling at me, she's, what I may say, passive-aggressive, whatever it is, and that's an activating trigger. And my belief is that I'm here an Asian and that person is a Caucasian, and she is responding to me as a minority, as a foreigner, and there is some racist element which is behind it. And therefore, the consequences of that is I feel inferior if I'm that kind of a person, or I feel depressed or whatever it is. So, and this is a very, very simple example. And every one of you would be able to relate to something similar that's happened to you, whether you're a minority or a majority or whatever happened, that somebody behaves in a particular way and you take it personally and you interpret it as something which is demeaning to you as a result of a conditioned belief that you have within yourself. And that creates a consequence which can be really be bad. And this over a period of time creates a neural network in you, and it creates, in a sense, a negative habit of putting yourself down. So positive psychology is all about, at that point in time, questioning as to, does this belief have any validity? That the fact that I believe that this person was actually trying to insult me, demean me, or put me down, could it be something else? And going deeper into and it requires some help sometimes, going deeper into it and understanding that whatever was happening with that person could have been completely isolated from who you are. It got nothing to do with you. The issue is nothing to do with who you are as a person. And that leads to what is called E, the energization part of it. And I've worked the last 3 or 4 years since I got to know about positive psychology. I incorporate it very often along with certain other things in my work. And I found it extremely useful. And we can have, if you're interested, I can speak about positive psychology. I can get someone who's an expert in positive psychology to work with you through the session. 2 other areas, now that somebody had asked me this question, I would like to just mention them, not go too much into detail. There is an area of now being applied to coaching called Constellations. Whittington has written this book called Constellations in Systemic Thinking. It's a little different. It requires some help. But it's a kind of, you can create a visual imagery physically on a tabletop, putting figurines and stuff to represent the situation that you are in. For example, you're in a work situation, you have a boss and you have a team, and there's somebody else representing HR, someone else who's your line manager, and something else, and so on. So you would actually take out either stuff like maybe dolls, or you could put mugs or whatever it is, and put them on the table to represent all of them. And so there are 3 factors which are very important there. One is called the place. So you place them in relation to what your relationship to that person is. If you feel comfortable being close to that person, you would put that other figure, you being the central figure there, and you put the other figure next to you. But you feel that you are not, and then there is a problem, you will put it farther away. And similarly, you will rearrange everything in that way. The second one is called time. So is it something that has happened over time? So if you were to look at it as what is the situation today, what was it 1 year ago, and what is likely to be in future, would those situations change? So there's a certain dynamic that is happening. And the third one is called exchange. In your relationship with your boss or your subordinate, you are giving something and you're receiving something back. So where is the net balance? Are you giving more and feel that you are receiving less, and therefore you feel that you are being taken advantage of? Or are you giving less and the other person is giving far more, and therefore you feel guilty about something, saying that I'm taking away far more? So putting all that together, you can, a good coach can work with a client, putting this kind of a picture around. And I've worked on it. I wouldn't say sufficiently. I would love to work on it much more. And that's something which I find exciting. It's really a very, very good way of how you can coach better. Another one is, many of you may be familiar, is polarities, Barry Johnson. It's about the horns of a dilemma, as it were. I'm trying to look at another job. I'm in this job and I'm at another job. Which is going to be better? How am I going to decide? And typically, you look at the pros and cons and so on, but Barry Johnson offers you a process, a paradigm, which is far more powerful. The simplest way of describing that is, if you could put the plus points of both these elements and try and see what is the possibility of combining these two, and then arriving at a reconciliation, an alignment, which will give you the positive values of both these. And so that makes a huge a creation of huge awareness within you in terms of using polarities. So these are some of the techniques that you can bring to play in your coaching practice, and which are becoming now more and more prevalent, actually. I find more and more people are using polarities. There are more people who are using constellation. There are more people who are using systemic coaching, all this kind of stuff. So any other questions? Anybody else has any question at this time?
Yeah, Ram, I have one. I'm Vivek.
Yeah.
If a coach has a self-limiting block about certain aspect of his life, could he still coach a client with similar blocks, or would you say he should pass that client?
Interesting question. It would be difficult. Let me put it that way. It requires an extraordinarily aware coach who is insecure to work with somebody else on insecurity. I'm not saying it cannot be done. It may be possible, but it may not be optimal. So the simplest way is, actually, I mean, you raise a very, very important point. A coaching training should, in fact, help the coach to be able to get rid of their baggage. And that is one of the things that we are really trying to do, especially it's not always possible that within the 60 hours of ACC and 125 hours of PCC. But when we work with people in mastery, we work with them using a Socratic method, what I would call a Gurukul method that we followed in ancient India. And the primary purpose of that is not just the skill development, but in terms of creating that awareness of your, like what you mentioned, limiting beliefs and working with that. And I really believe that we have been able to make some breakthroughs in that. So my simple answer to your question is that the answer is yes, you can, but it may be difficult. I know that's not a very satisfactory answer, but I don't want to say, no, you can't do it, because I do think it is possible, but it requires a lot of effort. I've seen people who have experienced severe traumas and they have not really fully cleared themselves of those traumas. They are able to work with clients. The danger, however, is that these traumas could break loose when you are in a stressful situation. And that could be catastrophic for yourself as well as the other person. That's really where the problem is. So whether you are sufficiently aware of the danger signals and to stay within certain boundaries is really your awareness. Does it answer your question, Vivek?
Yeah, thanks, Ram.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions in the next about 5 or 6 minutes that we have? Somebody asked a question on Strengthsfinder. Yeah.
Ram Gopal here. Can I speak, please?
Yeah, please.
Ram, I'm a Marshall Goldsmith certified coach. I recently did it, so I don't have much of practice done so far.
Mm-hmm.
But he also teaches the team coaching process. You know that.
Mm-hmm.
And the question I have is that when in a team, so many behaviors actually you are dealing with.
Mm-hmm.
You know, each one of them will have a different behavior which they like to attend to or should be attended to, and that's coming in the way for the team to go ahead also. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, I heard you saying that, you know, it has to be blended between the individual and the team. Mm-hmm. But what is the kind of process one should have when, you know, two divergent views or two divergent kind of behaviors are really working at each other and not letting the proceedings go further? What is the kind of process would you suggest?
Okay. Yeah, I have a process. I use that. It's see, first of all, I don't know whether did you go through a program conducted by Marshall or by one of the people who claimed to be.
Yeah, one of the people. Marshall was there to give me the certificate.
Yeah. Okay. Because there's a huge difference in terms of Marshall's own views. When I talked to Marshall about the Stakeholder Center program, he said, I mean, his answer was strange. He said, I have nothing to do with it. So the Stakeholder Center concept was created by him along with the guy who founded it, and the way it is being done today, perhaps it's not exactly the same. So anyway, that's a separate point. But coming to what you're saying, that is why team coaching cannot be as clearly based on a framework that individual coaching can be, using the 11 competencies of ICF or 8 competencies of EMCC. Team coaching is much more of an art. There is a far greater responsibility for the coach to be much more emotionally intelligent, emotionally aware, and even energy intelligent and energy aware, to be able to pick up the signals before they actually become dysfunctional in a team, or at a point in time, call for a break and then work with the individuals separately. So the first part of any teamwork that I do is to allow the team to open up completely using the areas of strength where they have performed extremely well. It's a combination of an appreciative inquiry and neurolinguistic programming process. If you're familiar with neurolinguistic programming, there is something called a change of state.
I am an NLP practitioner certified also.
Okay, so you would be aware of the change of state processes.
Yeah.
And especially, there's a book that Richard Bandler had written recently. I don't remember the name. It's an amazing book on change of states. So if you work on some of those, you can create a high within a team where they have the desire to work together. They work appreciatively. So using that space as an anchor, then you can split them into smaller groups to work with them. So what I keep doing is I start with a large group, break them into smaller groups, and then put them back into a larger group, and occasionally take a few people out. So it's very, very much a process where you are actually truly coaching in the moment. You are not using a preconceived kind of framework, tool, technique. This is what I'm going to work with. So to that extent, it's more difficult. But the fact is that one can learn and one can become more and more experienced, especially if one has had a few bad experiences, you know how not to let that happen. So that's the best, within the short period of time, I would be able to tell you that.
Thank you very much. Can you repeat the name of the recent book Bandler has written, Richard?
I don't have it with me.
No, the name you said.
The name is Richard Bandler.
No, I know Richard Bandler.
Yeah.
I'm saying the name of the book.
I don't remember. It is one of his later books. It's something to do with a gift or whatever. I don't know.
It's okay. I'll find out from the internet.
It should be.
Ram, is it Get the Life You Want?
Yeah, Get the Life You Want. Exactly. Get the Life You Want.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yes. Somebody recently gifted it to me. I now recall it. Yes, I have that book.
Read it. It's a great book. It's really very, very good book. Okay.
Only a couple of days back, somebody gifted it to me.
So for those,
thanks a lot, Ram. Thanks a lot.
That's okay. For those of you who are looking for the last password, is team coaching. So first one was Ram, and this is team coaching for what it is worth. So you can submit to us for usual. Please go to the website. In the website, there is this place where you can. Please do not send me a mail because even if I wish to, I cannot do anything about it. The whole thing is automated now. So if you want the CCU, you will get the CCU sent to you by the system. We are pretty much on top of the hour. And first of all, I apologize that today Ankush wasn't able to be here, but he can't help it. He had a personal emergency. And I hope there was some value in our interacting the way that we did, and you got something out of it. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much indeed. Bye.